thank you everyone for joining us on our Attack Surface Management Close the Windows You Didn't Know Were Open webinar. You are joined by myself, Amber Mitchell. I am the lead portfolio manager for our Attack Surface Management portfolio, and my colleague Lisa Wood.
Hi, I'm Lisa. So I head up the Attack Surface Management Global Delivery team.
Thanks, Lisa. So to do a quick run through the agenda, we have got an overview on what is attack surface management, why ASM and why now, real world risk reduction, sample reports and outcomes, and a couple of customer success stories before Q&A. So who is NCC Group? Most of you will have heard of us, but for those of you who haven't, we are a people-powered, tech-enabled organisation who focuses on a full suite of security services spanning from risk management, incident response, governance consultancy, technical assessments and testing, and managed security services. And that's just to name a few of our capability areas. All of our services are enhanced with threat intelligence, providing a real context-driven actionable intelligence for our clients. So, what is attack surface management? Traditionally, attack surface management focused on external assets only. Why? Because attackers begin on the outside, so mapping your external footprint is the first priority. However, in modern security, ASM includes anything that is exposed or accessible from outside or inside your environment that could be exploited, with the aim, obviously, of identifying, monitoring, and reducing all the possible entry points an attacker could use. So think of ASM as giving your security team the same view an attacker has, fix weaknesses before they're exploited. So to touch on some market insights, today's ASM solutions have been known by many names over the years, from vulnerability management to external attack surface management, and more recently, cyber continuous threat exposure management, so CTEM. As you can see in the orange boxes, Gartner recognises ASM and CASM, which was more traditionally internal and external assets pulled together, as obsolete before plateau. And I just think it's worth a mention that this is referring to the naming conventions and not the underlying capabilities, which have been brought together under broader terms, such as the continuous threat exposure management, and including additional capabilities that the market and the clients require sort of today. So, a couple of problem statements. So, organisations have lost visibility and control over their environments, making it increasingly more difficult to ensure they are sufficiently protected. 30% of breaches involve shadow IT, and the average organisation experiences a 10% change in their attack surface each month. Organisations can't secure what they don't know exists, and an out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach isn't appropriate when it comes to security. The average cost of a data breach is $4.4 million, and market figures show, specifically Gartner figures, that organisations who implement an ASM or CTEM type solution can see up to a 2/3 reduction in security breaches. 3 key business challenges that organisations face, which is making money, saving money, and managing risk. There's multiple examples, and I probably haven't even captured them all in this box. But here's some examples of how ASM solutions can support these challenges. So as an example, under making money, if your organisation is subjected to a security breach, this could significantly impact your brand reputation, which in turn reduces your ability to make money due to lost trust in the brand. Saving money, NCC's ASM solutions provide you with actionable intelligence. So this is based on real risk to your organisation and real context, giving you details on what to focus on to have the most risk reduction impact. This obviously optimises your security team's resource where it matters most, which is that mitigating and reducing the risk to your organisation rather than analysing endless lines of data. And finally, as an example, under the managing risk section, you can spend thousands on a security programme of work, but if you don't have a clear inventory of your attack surface, then you're leaving yourselves open to a breach you never see coming because you've got all of that shadow IT or shadow AI as an example. So, NCC's approach to ASM, how do we help you on your security journey? We have introduced a 3-tier model that helps meet security needs at 3 different levels, and we've named this with that broader ASM term, which will make more sense why in a moment. So our single tier provides you with a single external attack surface management engagement, which provides seedless external asset discovery and identifies exposures, which is a vulnerability, risk, misconfiguration, or even a compliance gap on those discovered assets. Our standard tier offers you a managed service around internal and/or external assets, and that is the more traditional version where the client would provide the scope. So it's a predefined scope from the likes of yourselves. Although we obviously advise clients to have the asset discovery element of the service in order to ensure all your assets are known and covered, we are aware that not all clients are at that point of their security journey and only want to cover those predefined scopes. So we do offer this flexibility in our standard service tier, along with a detailed managed service wrap at an agreed cadence that includes exposure identification. And finally, our advanced tier, this is where that continuous coverage comes into play. And this is our continuous threat exposure management service, where we will continuously discover your internal and/or external assets again, and continuously identify exposures on those discovered assets, and then provide you with a comprehensive managed service that has detailed remediation plans, enabling you, again, to focus your efforts where it matters most. So we've split our ASM solutions out into 3 key areas. So visualizing the invisible, getting the basics right, and intelligent action. Visualizing the invisible is key to ensure you have sufficient and effective coverage across your assets. As I've said before, without that visibility, you're closing your windows but leaving your doors wide open. Getting the basics right. Attack surface management sounds simple in theory. Find everything that's exposed and then go and fix it. But in practice, it only works if the system is configured and tuned correctly. Otherwise, it just becomes noisy, misleading, expensive, and ineffective because there's just too much information to work through. The configuration and tuning takes time that a lot of security teams could spend performing mitigating activities, and just in general time that a lot of security teams don't have. And this is where the value of a managed service provider starts to come into play, is we will do that configuration and tuning on service setup, but also in life to ensure the service is always running optimally. And last but not least, the intelligent action. Out of the box ASM solutions typically find hundreds or thousands of potential exposures, but many are false positives, they are low value findings, or duplicated assets as an example. The tuning ensures the system understands which assets are real, which exposures matter, and which risks mapped to business impact and what it really means for you. Couple that with the exploit intelligence and threat intelligence NCC provides. It creates a service that enables clients to streamline their efforts on those key areas of focus. So to dig a little further into each of those 3 tier offerings. But before I do, when we refer to the term asset, I'm referring to IPs, web apps, certificates, domains, AI-related assets, routers, and more. It's not just what we would have traditionally considered an asset in the sense of an IP. It's a lot broader now, really covering your whole attack surface. The single ASM one-time engagement, as I said before, provides that seedless external asset discovery and segregates findings into their applicable subsidiary, which is particularly useful if you have different security teams responsible for different parts of the business. We're going to identify exposures present on the discovered assets, including the exploit intelligence that I've mentioned previously, which provides additional context enabling further prioritization. And that's based on what is of high focus from attack vectors, and where an asset is positioned externally, and how attractive that asset is given sort of the exposures and things on there. It does provide a point in time view of compliance gaps, and it is particularly great for mergers and acquisitions if you want to gain an understanding of the risks you may be inheriting. Clients do get a one-off debrief meeting from NCC, highlighting the main areas of concern and focus based on the client's attack surface and appetite for risk. And this quite often feeds into other programs of work as well, such as your pen testing engagements or incident response engagements, which you hopefully never need to have. The standard tier, as I said before, this is the more traditional offering, meaning clients provide the assets in scope, whether that be internal and/or external assets. Again, we discover exposures on the scoped assets at a cadence agreed with yourselves, and again, results are enhanced with exploit intelligence. We conduct the configuration and tuning regularly, and not just at the service setup stage, as I said before, to ensure the service is tuned and is as effective as possible during the life of the service. We provide results and remediation advice based on intelligent risk scoring, again, such as high value assets, exposures present, and focus and attractiveness from attack vectors. And finally, on the 3-tier model, we have the advanced tier. And as I said before, this is where continuous really comes into play. So we continuously discover our internal and our external facing assets. We segregate those assets into the applicable subsidiary and location, as well as mapping relatable assets. And just for context there, by this I don't mean, by this I mean identifying assets that are linked, such as this IP has this certificate and web app linked to it, for example. It isn't attack path mapping, but NCC do have services that cover attack path mapping if it's something you're interested in. But what this does here with those relatable assets, it does give us that comprehensive view of an asset and the appetite for risk. From here, we continuously identify exposures on the discovered assets and map them to the MITRE-ATT&CK framework, again, including the additional exploit and threat intelligence to enable that further context and to enable deeper prioritization. This service goes that extra mile and does include daily parts and services monitoring. It includes unauthenticated web app scanning, and all data is correlated and prioritized based on that intelligent risk scoring and what's important to our clients. Again, enabling us to provide clients with tailored remediation planning and customized alerts. A little bit further on this one, like I say, it's more detailed, more in-depth service. We can actually also accept or snooze risks at this level, which is beneficial if there is an asset that can be remediated without it being business impacting or it's end of life, so maybe there isn't any remediation activities that can take place. You obviously then want to focus your efforts elsewhere. We don't want to have all of the noise of these things that we know we can't fix and have potentially been accepted by the business. So we can remove that noise by accepting or snoozing. The great thing about this capability is it doesn't remove it completely. It essentially hides it. So we only do it for an agreed time. It does, however, avoid the instant smudging the waters and causing noise, but it will pop up again after that agreed time. So as an example, if you are decommissioning an environment and you're standing up a new environment, in reality, both of those environments run in parallel for a period of time. If you might decide that you don't want to perform any mitigating activities on that environment that's being decommissioned, so we will snooze the alerts, the exposures we find on there for a month, let's say. And after a month, if that asset still exists, that will pop back up as a sort of, hi, I'm still here. Do you want to snooze me again? Or actually, were you expecting that I'd disappeared now? And that just makes sure that there's none of that shift. Again, that you know all of your assets and something isn't thought decommissioned, but is actually still a risk to yourself. And then last couple of slides from me. So all of this sounds great, right? Or at least hopefully it all sounds great to you. But what does this actually mean? This slide here is an example from an existing NCC client. As you can see from the diagram, the client had 12,000 total assets across 18 subsidiaries, which equated to 22,000 open vulnerabilities, 334 of which we identified as critical. So that's great. We've already got it down from 22,000 to 334. But if you're a small security team, 334 is still a significant number to action. We were able to prioritise this further thanks to the effective configuration and tuning and utilising the exploit intelligence, threat intelligence, and that understanding of what you're trying to achieve from the programme of work, or in this scenario, what this client was trying to achieve. And combining this with the end goals, we managed to reduce it down to 131 issues for remediation across 123 assets. Again, enabling that client to focus their efforts on the areas that have the highest potential impact. Now, bearing that in mind, security teams, do you want, if you've got 5 hours a week to spend on these kind of activities, the question is, do you want to spend that 5 hours analysing all of this data and getting it down from 22,000 open vulnerabilities to 130 that you need to action? Or do you want to spend your 5 hours a week, hopefully you've got more time than that, but 5 hours a week, actually reducing the potential risk to your organisation by performing those mitigating activities and letting us do all of that legwork ahead of that. And then last slide from me before I hand over to Lisa. We're continuously evolving our services and integrating our services with other NCC products. with the aim of giving clients that comprehensive view of their environment. So NCC's advanced CTEM tier is aligned to Gartner's 5 stages of CTEM, and we are currently in the process of expanding the validation step even further in the coming months by including continuous pen testing as a key component of that validation stage. As ever, we are keen to keep our services flexible to meet our varying clients' needs, so you can take continuous pen testing standalone or as part of the CTEM service. But to really align to that CTEM market context and market definition, it will be included in this service. That's it from me for now. I'll hand over to Lisa, who will share a bit more information on our delivery model.
Thanks, Amber. Hi, everybody. Some of you may know NCC Group of old, and you'll know that for over 25 years we've been developing and nurturing experts with our cybersecurity teams across the globe. We've got global expertise and supported by our local delivery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach. So we've provided a managed vulnerability service for over 20 years. We're ISO 9001 and 27001 compliant, and that's demonstrated by our clear processes and methodologies. What does this mean for our customers? They have streamlined, efficient onboarding and delivery. With our customer-centric values, our scheduling team ensures our customers are onboarded quickly and effectively. Customers are allocated a dedicated vulnerability consultant, which Amber mentioned, whose priority is to ensure that the service is configured for your environment. Through their technical expertise, they manage the service and provide regular remediation planning, meetings, new insights, and work to ensure that the service is tuned appropriately. Our internal world-renowned threat intelligence provides additional insights that we share with our customers to help make informed decisions around the safety of their assets. And the dedicated vulnerability consultant works to ensure you have identified your full attack surface, key being those that are previously unknown, and applies context and asset ownership with yourself. So that the relevant remediation teams can act quickly to resolve identified vulnerabilities. And our gold service can go beyond traditional CTEM services, and Amber's just alluded to this, by actively exploiting key value assets, chaining and identifying key vulnerabilities that may have been missed by traditional risk scoring. Excuse me. I'll later talk through a case study to demonstrate the value of ASM in enriching dark web and penetration testing. So discovery. This is key to our service. Traditional vulnerability management relies on a defined scope. This introduces a risk to business as an assumption may be made on what the attack surface is. We approach this problem from an attacker's eye view. This means we use open source intelligence methodologies to identify your unknowns. This discovery ensures that we have a full picture before we then identify vulnerabilities. And as Amber mentioned earlier, we do this through IP web app domain search type of OSINT discovery. Our data-rich sources then allow us to provide insightful information across the organisation and subsidiaries, including geographical metrics, your infrastructure, web applications, cloud hosts and services. And discovering and categorising is just the start of that journey. We provide regular scans to identify misconfigurations, outdate patches and expose ports and services. Over many years of supporting our customers with our managed services, NCC Group have gained a deep understanding of the challenges they face. Multiple platforms, differing scoring systems, and an ever-growing volume of identified vulnerabilities, and that, combined with limited remediation capacity, means organisations repeatedly confront the same critical questions. What are the most important vulnerabilities to remediate to make the biggest impact on reducing our risk? In essence, how can we ensure that our remediation team's effort have the best coverage, the most efficient effort that will have the biggest impact on their risk reduction? This is why remediation prioritization is key. While tooling can help significantly provide answers, management of these platforms takes expertise and time. And our dedicated consultant works to take this burden away, and along with prioritised ticketed outcomes, you are provided with a clear remediation plan that works for you. Of course, being able to demonstrate the impact of your remediation team on risk reduction can also be a challenge. We provide reporting that demonstrates how your security vulnerabilities landscape has changed over time. With regular reviews by our consultants and with you as our key stakeholders, we work towards clear, actionable and effective outcomes. I mentioned earlier that vulnerability management, CTEM, is not a silver bullet. So our extensive capability and integration across NCC Group allows us to go a step further in providing integrated services that delve deeper into your risk by providing contextualized evidence of your vulnerabilities. A lot of words there. Hopefully I'll show you in a case study. During a recent engagement, a client requested independent verification of their external state. So this included asset enumeration, assessment of exploitability, and a detailed analysis of potential attack vectors. So we delivered a single external attack surface management, EASM, assessment, which identified an additional 6,000 external facing assets that were not present in the client's estate, or they were aware of in their CMDB. As you can imagine, that is a risk. Each represented a discrete externally reachable endpoint and therefore an additional potentially attack path. The newly discovered assets form the initial scope, which we fed then into our OXM service, which is non-line exposure monitoring, which combines threat intelligence, expertise, and experience with automated capabilities of Dark IQ and Searchlight to continuously monitor risks across your digital footprint. This revealed previously unknown exposures, and these included dark web activity associated with the organisation, leaked or compromised credentials, potential phishing and impersonated domains, and other identifications of external threat attacks, or things that we should be a little bit concerned about. Following the discovery phase, all known and newly identified assets, including the 6,000 that we'd identified through the ASM service, were incorporated into a hybrid pen testing, and that allowed them to validate exploitability and identify the real-world attack chains. We provided then a consolidated report to the client, and that provided the client with a full visualization of their external attack surface, the enumeration of previously unknown assets, some threat intelligence findings and the dark web exposure, and confirmed where there was exploitable weaknesses across the estate. So this enabled the client to prioritise their remediation based on validated risks, streamline mitigation activities, and significantly strengthen their external security posture, and of course, the basis of which was ensuring that the true external attack surface was identified, which is really what attack surface management comes to. I'll just pass back to Amber as we have another case study.
Thanks, Lisa. This particular case study is a bit of a flip on what the ASM service was originally trying to do for this particular client. So again, it did what attack surface management was meant to do and discovered a load of additional assets in the US for this particular client. And as you can see there, the client wasn't aware of those assets. And actually, from a risk perspective, those assets looked pretty good. There was minimal risks associated with them. There wasn't an awful lot that needed to do to mitigate things from that perspective. So the client decided that they then wanted to look at what PII data was present on those assets, not just those assets, not just the ones we discovered in the US, but across their environment, which assets had PII data on them. We did that check to which ones handled it, and we actually identified that some of those assets that the client wasn't aware of originally in the US did have PII data on them. And that looped us around into that intelligent action piece. So although those US assets were secure and there wasn't an awful lot to do on those to mitigate things, ASM did actually identify that there was a GDPR gap, as you can see there, and therefore a non-compliance against the US assets with that PII data on them. So that enabled us to be able to, that enabled the client to be able to address that non-compliance and reduce any sort of potential of fines and things like that. Really like sharing this use case because for me, it feels like it's a little bit out of the norm. We found this asset's got this exposure on it and it was critical, go and fix it, which risk was reduced by this much. I think this shows that not every environment is the same, which we all know, and actually ASM, CTEM, EASM, whatever market terms being used, meets multiple different requirements and capabilities. So the last slide really, before we went into Q&A, believe it or not, was around utilising your current security investment. And there's essentially three levels we can play at from NCC's perspective as a managed security service provider. So the top of that layer, you've obviously got attack surface management. That is where we provide our managed services, as we've discussed earlier in this presentation, and we do that predominantly with our underlying tech, our partners, and we have some great partners, which are Psycognito and Qualys. I'm sure you've all heard of both of those. However, if a client also, which in most cases they do, have other security tooling from the likes of Tenable, or data coming in from Wiz and things like that, we can actually ingest that data into our platform, correlate it, normalize it, and provide a managed service wrap around that as well. So we can provide those licenses, Psycognito or Qualys, do our managed service wrap, and really utilize your current investment and pull all of that data together. And it just means you're not having to get different information from different sources constantly, and perhaps sort of duplicating efforts if those things aren't cross-correlated. Again, a little bit similar to the top one, excuse me, we do have the option to do a managed takeover. And again, that's utilising your current investment. So, have you already purchased Qualys directly or Psycognito directly, or actually utilising the capabilities you have with your Microsoft Defender licenses, but in actual fact, you're struggling to manage the output yourself. As that example, we went from 22,000 open vulnerabilities down to 130. And we can do a managed takeover where we would utilise your licenses, so there'd be no license cost from that perspective, and again provide our managed service wrap around your existing security investment. There's a small caveat there that in order to do that, most of the time you have to own the licenses. You've gone directly to one of these vendors, and if there's another third party like NCC Group involved, that makes it more challenging, but it's always a conversation we can have. And then finally, as a managed service provider, this isn't where we want to be, but we do offer license resell as well. And this is specifically around Psycognito and Qualys, with them being our partners. We do have access to a discount off what you would see list price for licenses, given that we are a partner of both these vendors. And we are in a position where we pass on some of that discount to yourselves. So actually, if you decide that you do want, you don't feel like you need an MSSP like NCC Group helping you with the service, and you just want the licenses, fine, come to us for the licenses, because at least you'll get it a little bit, it'll be a bit more cost effective than going direct to the vendors. And the reason we offer this is, let's face it, we would love to work with you and provide a managed service wrap to you, but our main purpose is to help clients protect and secure themselves. And if we can do that just by that license resell bit, that's what works for you, then we are happy to support you and make sure you are secure in that sense. That was the end of the presentation.
How does this differentiate from exposure management? So I can pick that up, and then Amber, if you want to add anything to it. So this, what we're talking really about is exposure management, right? We're talking about identifying your risks externally, starting from a discovery of understanding what you don't know, shadow IT, for example, being a good example, and also looking at internally, again, through discovery and identifying what's your exposure internally as well, and then looking at seeing how we can chain these things together. Because one thing we've identified over many years is traditional scoring. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the area that you should focus on. So if you look at risk scoring from most scanning vendors, they don't tend to just rely now on things like CVSS. So we look at, generally we'd look at systems like CISA, we'd look at first EPSS, things like that. And we've got our own threat intel as well, and other data sources. And Amber touched on this with mentioning exploit intelligence. So what we need to be able to provide support for our customers is that ability to get them, and Amber showed a picture of like a funnel, and that has been the issue over many years with exposure management. So what we're trying to do really is get over that problem of not knowing what we don't know, because that doesn't help, And then obviously helping our customers with these multiple platforms that everybody's got. You know, we've got tons of platforms, tons of information, great information, but our businesses tend to want to focus on their core business. So as a managed service, it's our job to work with our customers and take that pain away. So, you know, we always talk about in vulnerability management about getting the basic rights. I don't know if you listen to any of the webinars NCC Group run, but you listen to, I was listening to our amazing Matt Hull yesterday around threat intel, and we were talking about phishing, various phishing and things like that, and, you know, vulnerabilities that are exposed. And what we're here to do is to identify those exposed risks and to drill them down into consumable tickets in effect for your team, so that you can be focused on the right areas. So you're not trying to run your business and also look at 18,000 subsidiaries, 12,000 assets, but using a score that really is looking at what's actively exploited. So not just it's got a high CVSS score, you know, what's actually actively exploited, even to the point of, you know, looking at your industrial sectors, your sectors, and seeing, you know, what's the norm within your sector, so we can use our threat intelligence to help with that prioritization. So that's the world's longest answer to how does this differentiate from exposure management. And in essence, what I'm saying is it is really all about exposure management, right? Amber?
If I added to that, I think it goes back to the first slide that I shared before around the Gartner hype cycle. So ASM is essentially that discovering bit and the mapping of your assets. Exposure management is then, as it says on the tin, identifying those exposures and understanding what you need to do with that information, when and why.
Does uncovering IT and shadow IT generate more work for security teams? Because it's a little bit like, if I don't know it's a risk, is it still a risk? So I guess at the end of the day, you know, the more you're going to identify, the more you're going to need to patch, right? And that's the job of cybersecurity. But I think the important thing there is we've got to look at not just the volume, but really what is the true risk. You know, so you may identify more risks, more vulnerabilities, but what is the risk to your business? And we can't do that based on just scores alone. So the beauty of it, working with a vulnerability consultant, is they're able to look to work with you, integrate your CMDB, etc., into the solution, but also look at tagging assets. So you know that's one of the issues in vulnerability management is the context. So that is quite a big job sometimes. So by integration with your CMDB and having those tagging and getting a managed service to do that for you, or to identify the vulnerabilities based on your knowledge, then obviously that can help with that remediation prioritization. So does it generate more work for security teams? Who knows, because who knows what vulnerabilities, but it's just going to keep somebody a lot happier than leaving a lot of unknowns. Amber, what's your thoughts?
I think it's, as you said, Lisa, I think you can either keep the light turned off and leave yourself open to a breach, which makes all of your efforts you do in any way almost redundant, because you've got, you've leave yourself open to a breach you don't see coming, as I said before. As for it making more work, I can see why that is the perception. There's more assets, more vulnerability data, more exposure data, and all of that. But actually, with the capabilities we have in the likes of our services, that context-driven, that risk scoring Lisa was just talking about, that exploit intelligence, that threat intelligence, and then actually the context of what's important to yourselves as clients, that actually helps us do that prioritization that we shared in that funnel slide.
How do you identify what a high value asset is, which sort of comes into that answer really? So obviously as a service we identify that through our own intelligence, our risk scoring, and that's based on, you know, beyond the CVSS scoring obviously, so how attractive it is, how discoverable it is, and various other data sources. So using obviously our own threat intelligence and the tagging we mentioned, and obviously integration within your CMDB. So I think, you know, we can't define the context without the customer's information, because obviously you understand the true value to your business. So, but what you do, you provide that to our vulnerability consultants. We tag those assets, as we've mentioned, and then we tune the system. I think Amber had a few slides around this at the start. So we're tuning our outputs to meet your demand. So, for example, if you decide your team is small and you just want to look at 100 of the most high risk vulnerabilities at the start, then we work with you, we identify them. But it's an ever evolving state. Vulnerability management, as I'm sure everyone listening will know, it's not something that stays static, and therefore this is forever changing and evolving. So we'll work with you on a regular basis to look at the next step. So, you know, if you're finding it now that you're on top of your remediation and you want to start widen that funnel, then we do the work with you on that. So, and that work from your point of view is having just a review meeting, and then we'll get on in the background and release the necessary tickets based on the risk profiles and things that you want. And then, Amber, do you want to add anything to that, or shall I jump to the fourth question?
Yeah, I think you covered that great, and you probably mentioned this, but I think, as we say, we identify a high value asset. As Lisa said, that's a mix of what's a high value asset to you, but then with that exploit intelligence, it's still a high value asset to you, but actually we can amend the risk score based on the attractiveness of that asset as well. So you might have two assets. One's let's call it a critical asset, a high value asset to yourselves, and you might have another asset that isn't considered a critical asset from a business perspective and things like that. The critical asset will have exposures on there, and they might be low risk exposures, whereas the non-critical asset could be something that is an externally facing asset, which would bump up the priority because, you know, it's easier to find those than something that's internal. Okay, so you've got that bit, but then now it's also got more critical exposures on there, and out of those exposures, by the way, this exposure here is something that attackers are actively looking to exploit, and therefore bumps that criticality, that prioritization up further. As Lisa said, we can only do, you know, the foundation of that is that configuration and tuning and understanding what's an important asset, what's important to, you know, to the clients. But our exploit intelligence and our threat intelligence actually makes us puts us in a position where we can alter those risk scores on what is actually potentially a real impact to your organization.
How do you ensure you inform us of new risks? So again, I can jump onto that and then pass that over to yourself, Amber. Yep. So how do you ensure? So this has been a challenge over the years, really, isn't it? Because vulnerability management is seen to be a monthly or a quarterly scan and what happens in between. And as I said earlier, vulnerabilities are not something that just come every month. Wouldn't that be a nice dream, hey? So that is a challenge. And so what we do with that, and I know we have the word continuous, and that always brings an argument to the table because people, what is the definition of continuous? But to me, continuous is really about informing customers in between those regular scans. So obviously, if we've got internal assets for scanning, we will be looking at we can report up to 4 hours on those, but you have to get a balance of what's, how you can deal as an end user with the amount of information. So we also look using our own threat intel again. We get alerts from our threat intel team, and then we raise additional tickets to sort of supplement what you see as well. So we have also emerging threat alerts from various suppliers. We've got our own threat intel, and those we correlate with your estate. So we don't just sort of get an alert and then forward it on. We're able to search our databases to look at whether that's relevant to you, and then raise the appropriate tickets also as well. Amber, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just I think one thing that I feel is really important is you as part of these services, you get a dedicated account manager. So for your service term, you are always working with the same person. So actually they really gain an understanding of your environment, what you're trying to achieve from the services, and therefore really understand the kinds of things to filter through to you. At the end of the day, it's about filtering out that, understanding everything, but filtering out that noise on the things that really make a difference to reducing your risk.
One thing I realised when we're talking about risk exposure and, you know, how do you know what's really a true risk? The other thing within our CTEM service, we haven't, I mentioned it earlier as a gold sort of, I call it like a gold option. And that is really going beyond just standard vulnerability management. So what I mean by that is, you know, in vulnerability management, whether you want to call it ASM, exposure management, CTEM, etc., the sort of core of vulnerability management is informing you based obviously on identifying misconfiguration, patches, and exposed ports and services. And we can tag, etc., etc., but we've not proven the true risk to you, if that makes sense. And that's why we also have a sort of, and I'm calling it gold, and Amber will correct me in a minute because it's probably not called gold, but
advanced,
that's it, I knew it wasn't a gold option within our CTEM service, and that is to actively exploit. So that is in effect what you would know in the industry as traditional penetration testing, but it also goes an extra step by looking at vulnerability chaining. So we've just been talking to a customer today actually around this and identified some really critical vulnerabilities within their infrastructure. And what that means is, beyond just saying you are vulnerable to this, we don't need to worry so much about scores, because we've actually proved here's what you thought was a low and a medium CVSS score, for example, and actually we've just exploited SMB, I guess, and therefore, you know, that really shows that this is, it doesn't need me to say it's got this risk score, this risk score. We're actually doing that. So that's the real differentiator to me, you know, with the question around how is it different to exposure management. With NCC Group, we have that additional level of exposure, exploitation is the word I was looking for. Been a long
validation to fit in with
yeah.
So
just
yeah, and that validation stage will be on a regular occurrence as well. So we still offer you know, other pen testing services within NCC, your traditional point in time. There's other continuous pen testing capabilities, and then we've got the continuous pen testing element of CTEM that we are introducing in the very, very near future. I just wanted to thank you all for joining. Thank you to my wonderful co-host Lisa, and you can't see her, but thank you in the background to Lucy, who keeps us on the straight and narrow. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.